What if everything you've been taught about prayer has been keeping you from the very miracles you're desperately seeking? When Jesus stood before crowds and declared, "I am the way, the truth, and the life," most people heard it as beautiful poetry, as comforting religious language meant to inspire faith. But what if those weren't just words of comfort at all? What if hidden within that simple declaration was the exact same power that allowed him to turn water into wine, to heal bodies that doctors had given up on, to raise the dead back to life, and to walk through his own execution into resurrection? Has this ever happened to you? You face a crisis? Maybe your health is failing, your finances are collapsing, or a relationship you cherished is falling apart, and you do exactly what you were taught to do. You pray. You pray with all your heart, begging God for intervention, pleading for a miracle, asking for help from somewhere beyond yourself. Days turn into weeks, weeks into months, and yet nothing changes. The problem remains, the pain continues, the lack persists. And slowly a terrible question begins to whisper in the back of your mind. Is God even listening? But before we begin, please hit the like button and let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world. And if you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any of our future videos. Here's what most people never realize about those moments of unanswered prayer. The problem isn't that God isn't listening. The problem isn't that you're not worthy or that you don't have enough faith. The problem is that the entire way we've been taught to approach divine power is fundamentally backwards. We've been taught to reach outside ourselves, to beg an external deity for favors, to hope that our prayers somehow travel across a vast cosmic distance to reach a God who sits somewhere far away, deciding whether or not we deserve help. What you're about to discover might surprise you because it completely overturns this entire framework. When Jesus spoke those two words, "I am," he wasn't making a philosophical statement about his unique divine nature. He wasn't claiming something that only he possessed while the rest of humanity remained separate and powerless. He was revealing a universal principle, a spiritual law that operates whether we understand it or not. And that lies dormant within every single person watching this video right now. Stay with me until the end, because what we're about to explore goes far beyond positive thinking or visualization techniques. This isn't about affirmations or manifesting or any of the watered-down spiritual trends you've probably encountered before. This is about understanding the actual mechanism behind every miracle Jesus performed, the consciousness that allowed him to command reality itself to shift, to bend, to transform according to spiritual truth rather than material appearances. The tragedy is that millions of people spend their entire lives praying, seeking, searching for something they already possess but don't recognize. They're looking for God in temples and churches and sacred texts, never realizing that the very "I" that searches is itself the divine presence they're seeking. And this misunderstanding, this case of mistaken identity, is precisely what keeps suffering in place generation after generation. So what did Jesus actually mean when he said, "I am"? And more importantly, how can understanding these two simple words transform your relationship with health, abundance, purpose, and every challenge you're currently facing? Edgar Cayce spent decades exploring the deepest mysteries of consciousness, healing, and spiritual transformation. And among all his revelations about human potential, past lives, and the hidden workings of the mind, there was one discovery that stood above everything else, a breakthrough that would fundamentally alter how we understand not just prayer, but the very nature of identity itself. What Cayce uncovered wasn't a new technique or a better method for getting God's attention. It was something far more radical, something that completely dismantles the entire framework of spiritual seeking that religion has built over thousands of years. When Cayce examined the words of Jesus with his unique gift of accessing higher consciousness, he saw something that most theologians and spiritual teachers had completely missed. Jesus wasn't speaking as a man when he said, "I am the resurrection and the life." He wasn't claiming a special privilege reserved only for the Son of God, while everyone else remained ordinary and powerless. The hidden truth behind those declarations was that Jesus had recognized something about his own identity, something so profound, so transformative, that it gave him complete authority over matter, disease, even death itself. Here's where the journey takes an unexpected turn. Jesus wasn't identifying with his physical body when he spoke those words. He wasn't thinking of himself as a carpenter's son from Nazareth, wasn't claiming power for his human personality or his individual ego. What he was declaring with absolute certainty and unwavering conviction was that the presence of God was his only true identity. Not "God is with me," or "God helps me," or "God loves me," but rather, the I that I am is God, expressing in form. This wasn't poetry. This wasn't metaphor. This was a statement of spiritual law, a recognition of ultimate reality that immediately gave him dominion over everything material circumstances could throw at him. And this is where everything we've been taught gets turned completely upside down. Our entire religious conditioning has trained us to look outside ourselves for God. We've built magnificent churches pointing toward the heavens, created elaborate rituals to somehow reach across the distance between us and the divine, spent lifetimes praying upward and outward to a power we believe exists somewhere else, somewhere beyond us, somewhere we must somehow convince to notice our struggles and intervene in our problems. The whole mindset is based on separation, on the assumption that you are here and God is there, and the spiritual journey is about building a bridge across that gap. If this resonated with you, hit subscribe. I share transformative spiritual principles focused on real application, not just theory. Join this journey of genuine transformation. But what if the gap never existed? What if the entire premise of separation is the fundamental illusion that keeps us trapped in suffering? The revelation that shook Edgar Cayce, and that has the power to completely transform your experience right now, is that God isn't a distant power you're trying to reach. The divine presence is the very I that you are in this moment. Not the I of your personality, not the I of your history or your circumstances or your problems, but the essential I of pure consciousness itself. The awareness that says, "I exist, I am," before any other thought or identity is added. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, because understanding this intellectually is one thing, but recognizing how it actually operates in your daily life, how it affects your health, your relationships, your sense of purpose, your experience of abundance or lack, that's where the real transformation begins to unfold. Write in the comments, "I am ready to see this," if this shift in perspective is starting to resonate with something deep inside you. When Edgar Cayce first encountered this truth, it didn't feel like a pleasant addition to his spiritual knowledge. It felt like an earthquake that shattered the entire foundation of everything he thought he understood about how healing works, how transformation happens, how human beings relate to the divine. He had spent years helping people through his readings, accessing information from higher consciousness to guide them toward health and wholeness. But this revelation about the I am went deeper than any technique or method he had ever encountered. It wasn't another tool to add to the spiritual toolkit. It was the dismantling of the entire belief system that said you needed tools in the first place. What Cayce discovered through decades of practice and countless real-world demonstrations was that this simple truth could transform every single aspect of human experience. Health conditions that had persisted for years would suddenly shift when a person truly grasped their real identity. Relationships that seemed hopelessly broken would heal when both people stopped identifying with their wounded personalities and recognized the divine presence beneath. Financial lack would dissolve when someone ceased claiming poverty as their identity and remembered that infinite abundance is the nature of the I am they truly are. Purpose would become clear when the confusion of the human mind gave way to the intelligence of consciousness itself, expressing through them. And here's what makes this so different from every other approach you've probably tried. The transformation didn't come from doing more, from adding new practices, from learning better techniques for manifesting or visualizing or affirming. It came from a shift in consciousness, from a fundamental change in how these people perceived themselves at the deepest level. Nothing external needed to change first. The outer circumstances simply rearranged themselves to match the inner recognition of truth. Think about what this means for whatever you're facing right now. The health issue that won't resolve, the financial pressure that keeps mounting, the relationship that causes you pain, the sense that you've lost your way and don't know your purpose anymore. What if none of these problems are actually what they appear to be? What if they don't exist because something is fundamentally wrong with your life, because you made bad decisions, because you're being punished, or because you're somehow less blessed than others? What if every single problem you face exists for one reason only? You've forgotten your true identity. This changes everything about how you approach challenges. The solution isn't in manipulating circumstances, isn't in trying harder, working longer, praying more fervently, or finally finding the right technique that will make things work. The solution is in remembering who you really are at your core, beneath all the stories, beneath all the history, beneath all the identities you've accumulated over a lifetime of experiences. When you remember that the I of your being is divine presence itself, problems don't need to be solved. They dissolve naturally, because they were never about external circumstances to begin with. They were about a case of mistaken identity, about consciousness, believing itself to be limited when limitation is impossible for what you truly are. And this is precisely why this understanding of I am isn't just another spiritual technique you can add to your morning routine. It's not a visualization method where you picture what you want and hope it manifests. It's not a positive thinking approach where you repeat affirmations to override negative thoughts. Those approaches still operate from the premise that you're a limited person trying to become something better, trying to attract something you don't have, trying to fix something that's wrong. This is a fundamental shift in how you perceive yourself and your relationship with the divine. It's not about doing something different, it's about being someone different, or rather recognizing what you already are and have always been beneath the layers of false identity. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic because there's something crucial about how we use these two words every single day that most people never notice. Drop a comment saying, "I see the pattern now," if you're beginning to recognize how this applies to your own life journey. Every authentic spiritual teaching throughout history, if you strip away the cultural clothing and the religious terminology, points to this exact same truth. Buddhism talks about recognizing your Buddha nature. Hinduism speaks of realizing you are Atman, which is Brahman. Christian mystics whispered about union with God. Sufis describe dissolving into divine love. The language differs, the practices vary, but the core revelation remains identical. You are not separate from the source of all existence. The feeling of separation, the sense that you're a small individual cut off from infinite power, is the fundamental illusion that generates all suffering. But here's what happened over generations. This revolutionary truth got buried under layers of religious conditioning. Institutions arose that needed you to believe in separation because bridging that gap became their purpose, their authority, their reason for existence. You were taught that you're fundamentally flawed, born into sin, distant from God by your very nature. And then you were offered the path back, through their rituals, their intermediaries, their approved methods of worship and devotion. The entire structure depends on you believing that God is somewhere else, and you need help getting there. Think about the psychological impact of this belief system on your daily decisions and your sense of self-worth. You've spent your entire life believing you're not enough, that you need to earn divine favor, that you must somehow become worthy of blessings, that your prayers might or might not be answered depending on factors you can't control. This creates a constant state of spiritual anxiety, a perpetual sense of inadequacy, a feeling that you're always falling short of what you need to be to deserve God's attention. The revelation that Edgar Cayce uncovered and that Jesus demonstrated through every miracle he performed completely obliterates this entire framework. God isn't something outside you that you need to connect with through effort, discipline, or perfect behavior. God is the very I that you are in this present moment, not the I of your personality with all its quirks and flaws, not the I of your past mistakes and accumulated guilt, but the essential I of pure existence itself, the consciousness that animates your body, that witnesses your thoughts, that exists before any story or identity is added to it. When Jesus said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life," he wasn't claiming exclusive divine status that set him apart from everyone else. He was demonstrating the ultimate reality that exists within each person, waiting to be recognized beneath the layers of false identity we've all accumulated. He was showing what becomes possible when a human being fully recognizes their true nature instead of identifying with limitation, lack, and separation. If you found value here, hit the like button. It helps this message reach others who are searching for exactly this understanding. And this is where your entire spiritual journey transforms from struggle to recognition. Imagine what shifts in your mindset when you truly grasp that you don't need to beg or plead for what you need. You don't need to hope that your prayers somehow travel across cosmic distance to reach a deity who might or might not respond based on your worthiness or the proper technique you used. You don't need to perform spiritual gymnastics, accumulate good deeds, or finally become pure enough to deserve divine attention. The divine presence isn't something you reach for through years of practice. It's your essential nature, your true identity, the foundation of your being right now in this moment. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, because there's something you do dozens of times every day that either reinforces this truth or denies it completely. Write "I am listening" in the comments if you're ready to discover how your everyday language is either empowering or imprisoning you. When you truly grasp this truth about your identity, something remarkable happens in how you experience life. Your problems don't vanish in a puff of mystical smoke. That would be nice, but it's not quite how consciousness works. What changes is far more profound than problems disappearing. Your entire relationship with challenges transforms at a fundamental level. You're no longer a small, helpless person standing before overwhelming circumstances that seem completely beyond your control. You're no longer a victim of conditions, desperately hoping that somehow, someday, things will get better. Instead, you begin to recognize yourself as the infinite expressing in finite form, as consciousness itself, appearing as this particular life experience with all its unique flavors and textures. But here's where most people unknowingly sabotage this recognition every single day, multiple times a day, through something so automatic they don't even notice they're doing it. Pay attention to how you use the words "I am" in your everyday conversations, in your internal dialogue, in those quiet moments when you're describing yourself to yourself. How often do you say, "I am tired," when exhaustion hits? How quickly do you declare, "I am broke," when looking at your bank account? How automatically does "I am sick" arise when your body shows symptoms? How naturally does "I am afraid" emerge when facing uncertainty? These seem like innocent statements, just honest descriptions of how you feel in the moment. But something far more significant is happening behind the scenes of these casual declarations. Each time you attach "I am" to a condition or circumstance, you're making a profound declaration about your identity that carries real consequences in your experience. You're not just describing a temporary state, you're claiming that state as who you are at your core. You're identifying the eternal I with temporary conditions, declaring that the infinite presence expressing as you is defined by limitation, lack, fear, or illness. And here's the revelatory insight that can completely reshape your entire mindset and transform how you navigate every challenge from this moment forward. The "I am" you speak isn't about your human self with all its vulnerabilities and limitations. It's not about your personality with its preferences and quirks. It's not about your history with all its triumphs and failures. It's not about your current circumstances with all their pressures and difficulties. When you understand the spiritual significance of these two words, when you grasp what you're actually invoking every time you say them, you realize that "I am" refers to the infinite presence expressing as you right now in this moment, not the temporary conditions you're experiencing, not the passing states that come and go like weather patterns across the sky of consciousness. Think about the implications of this for just a moment. When you say "I am tired," you're not making a neutral observation. You're claiming that the infinite consciousness that is your true nature is tired. When you declare "I am broke," you're stating that infinite abundance itself is experiencing lack. When you announce "I am sick," you're asserting that perfect life and wholeness is diseased. Can you see the fundamental contradiction in these statements? Can you feel how they violate the actual truth of what you are? Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic because Jesus demonstrated a completely different way of using these powerful words, a way that opened the door to miracles instead of reinforcing limitation. Type "I'm beginning to see" in the comments if this is starting to shift how you understand your own daily language patterns. When you say "I am," with spiritual awareness, with conscious recognition of what those words truly invoke, you're not speaking as a limited human being with all its restrictions, weaknesses, and vulnerabilities. You're speaking as consciousness itself, as the boundless, timeless essence that is your true nature, beneath all the accumulated layers of personality and history. And this means that the words you attach after "I am" are either aligned with this eternal truth, reinforcing what is real and unchanging, or they're mistakenly identifying the infinite with temporary, limited conditions that have nothing to do with your actual identity. Jesus understood this with absolute clarity, and his entire ministry demonstrated what becomes possible when you use these words only for truth. He never said, "I am sick," even when his body must have experienced fatigue. He never declared "I am lacking," even when he had no place to lay his head. He never claimed "I am weak," or "I am limited," or "I am insufficient" in any circumstance he faced. Instead, every time he spoke those two words, he was identifying with the eternal, unchanging reality of his being. "I am the resurrection and the life. Not I hope to be, not I'm trying to become, but I am right now. I am the light of the world," a declaration of present reality, not future aspiration. "I am the way, the truth, and the life," claiming his identity with what is eternal, what cannot change, what remains true regardless of circumstances. And here's what most people miss when they read these statements. Jesus wasn't being metaphorical. He wasn't using poetic language to inspire people or make them feel good. He wasn't speaking symbolically about some distant spiritual ideal. He was making precise declarations about the nature of consciousness itself, about what he truly was, beneath the appearance of a physical body walking through ancient Palestine. Each statement was a recognition of reality, and that recognition gave him complete authority over everything material circumstances could present. Can you imagine the freedom that comes when you stop identifying your essential self with temporary conditions? When you recognize that the I in you, the awareness that says, I exist before any other thought arises, is the same I that Jesus was referring to. Not similar to it, not aspiring toward it, but the exact same eternal, perfect, whole consciousness expressing through a different body, a different personality, a different set of life circumstances. This recognition doesn't deny your human experience or ask you to pretend you're not having real challenges. It transforms your relationship to every experience completely because you know what you are beneath the changing conditions. Think about how this shifts your entire approach to whatever you're facing right now. When pain appears in your body, you don't claim, I am in pain. You recognize that sensations are arising, but the I that witnesses them remains untouched, whole, perfect. When your bank account shows a low balance, you don't declare, I am broke. You see numbers on a screen while knowing the I that you are is infinite abundance itself. When fear arises in response to uncertainty, you don't identify as, I am afraid. You notice the emotion while resting in the I that is eternal peace beyond all circumstances. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic because there's a hidden mechanism at work here that most spiritual teachings never explain clearly. Drop. This is clicking for me. In the comments, if you're starting to see how this changes everything about how you've been approaching your challenges. This revelation gets to the very heart of why human beings suffer in the first place, why pain persists beyond physical causes, why problems seem to multiply despite our best efforts to solve them. Every single time you say, I am sick, I am broke, or I am afraid, you're doing something that goes far beyond simply describing your current situation. You're performing a profound and ultimately damaging act of identification. You're attaching your divine identity, the infinite presence that is your true self, to temporary conditions that have nothing to do with what you actually are. You're claiming that consciousness itself, that eternal awareness, that boundless life force is somehow limited, diminished, or constrained by circumstances. And this mindset trap, this case of mistaken identity, is the hidden source of all suffering that persists beyond natural causes. Because here's the mechanism that operates beneath the surface of your experience. It's not what happens to you that causes your deepest pain. External events come and go. Bodies experience sensations. Bank accounts fluctuate. Relationships go through seasons. These are movements in consciousness, waves on the surface of an infinite ocean. But the suffering that grips you, that keeps you awake at night, that makes you feel powerless and hopeless, that comes from what you claim I am is. When you declare I am failing, you're not describing a temporary setback. You're identifying the eternal with failure itself. When you announce I am not good enough, you're not noting a skill gap. You're claiming that infinite perfection is somehow inadequate. Can you see what's happening in this process? You're identifying the eternal with the temporary, the infinite with the finite. You're giving power to illusion by declaring it to be your truth. You're forgetting your true nature and then wondering why you feel so lost, so limited, so trapped. And in that forgetting, in that false identification, you're actually perpetuating the very conditions you desperately want to escape. Your consciousness shapes your experience, and when your consciousness is identifying with limitation, limitation becomes your lived reality, not because it's true, but because you're claiming it as your identity. Jesus demonstrated a completely revolutionary way of using these two powerful words. A way that opened doors instead of closing them, that invited miracles instead of reinforcing problems. He never said, "I am sick," even when facing physical challenge. He never declared, "I am lacking," even when hungry in the wilderness. He never claimed, "I am weak" or "I am limited" in any circumstance. Instead, every time those two words left his lips, he was making a declaration of eternal truth. "I am the resurrection," identifying with life itself that cannot die. "I am the light," claiming his identity with consciousness that illuminates all things. "I am the way," recognizing himself as the path, not someone seeking the path. In each instance, he was identifying with the infinite, with what cannot change, with what is eternally true regardless of appearances. He used "I am" only to claim what is real, never to reinforce temporary conditions that would pass away. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic because understanding this principle intellectually is one thing, but applying it in the midst of real challenges requires seeing how it actually works in practice. Write, "I'm ready to apply this" in the comments if you're feeling the shift from understanding to embodiment beginning to take root. This insight has the power to transform your entire life journey from this moment forward, because what you're beginning to see is that your words aren't neutral descriptors passively reporting on reality. They're active forces that shape and create your experience. When you attach "I am" to limitation, "I am stuck," "I am powerless," "I am unworthy," you're not just observing these conditions. You're reinforcing them in your consciousness, giving them substance, declaring them to be your truth. And consciousness, being what it is, arranges your experience to match what you claim yourself to be. But when you use "I am" only with truth, only with what is eternal and unchanging, "I am whole," "I am the presence of abundance," "I am the light of awareness," your experience begins to mirror that higher consciousness. Not because you're manufacturing a fake reality, but because you're aligning with what is actually true beneath temporary appearances. And here's where we reach a crucial understanding that most spiritual teachers either miss or don't explain clearly enough. The "I am" that is your true identity isn't something you need to create, develop, or achieve through spiritual practice. It isn't a goal you're working toward, a state you'll finally reach after enough meditation, prayer, or personal development work. It already is, complete and whole, perfect and infinite, right now in this moment. You don't become the "I am" through achievement or discipline or years of dedicated practice. The entire journey is simply about stopping the identification with what you are not, with the stories, the histories, the limitations, the conditions that you've mistakenly claimed as your identity. This is the liberating truth that sits at the heart of every authentic spiritual tradition when you strip away the cultural packaging and religious terminology. You don't need to climb a sacred mountain to become enlightened, as if enlightenment is something you lack and must acquire through heroic effort. You don't need to spend decades in disciplined prayer to become worthy of God's presence, as if worthiness is something you must earn through spiritual performance. The divine presence that is your true self already exists in its absolute fullness. Right now, underneath the layers of false identity you've accumulated, your spiritual journey isn't about becoming something new, achieving some special state, or transforming into what you currently are not. It's about uncovering what has always been true, recognizing what you already are, removing the veils of illusion rather than adding layers of accomplishment. Think about the profound shift in your mindset when this truly lands. You're not on a journey of self-improvement where you're constantly measuring yourself against some ideal you haven't yet reached. You're on a journey of self-discovery, of remembering, of recognition. Every practice, every insight, every moment of clarity isn't making you into something better. It's revealing what was always present beneath the noise of false identification. The pressure to become releases. The anxiety about being enough dissolves. The striving to achieve spiritual worthiness fades away because you realize there's nowhere to get to, nothing to become. There's only the recognition of what already is, what has always been, what could never not be. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic because there's a practical application of this understanding that can shift your relationship with every problem you're currently facing. Put "I already am" in the comments if this truth is beginning to resonate at a level deeper than intellectual understanding. Every single problem you're facing right now, every challenge that seems insurmountable, every situation that appears impossible to resolve, exists for one fundamental reason that has nothing to do with bad luck, karma, or divine punishment. You've forgotten that the I that you are is God expressing in form. Not will be someday, when you finally get spiritual enough, not can become through enough effort and discipline, but is right now in this present moment, regardless of what appearances are screaming at you. This isn't positive thinking where you're trying to convince yourself of something you don't believe. This isn't wishful manifesting where you're attempting to attract what you lack. This is spiritual law operating at the deepest level of reality. The same law that allowed Jesus to command storms, heal diseases, and transcend death itself. When you're facing illness, when symptoms are showing up in your body and doctors are giving you diagnoses, the natural temptation is to immediately claim, "I am sick and I need healing." Every fiber of your human conditioning pushes you toward identifying with the condition, toward believing that sickness defines you in this moment. But here's what happens the instant you claim, "I am sick." You've denied the fundamental truth of your being. You've identified infinite spirit with finite limitation. The I that you truly are cannot be sick because that I is infinite spirit, perfect life, consciousness itself. The body may be showing symptoms, yes. The physical form may be experiencing sensations and displaying conditions, but that's not the I. That's not your true identity. The I am is perfect, whole, complete, untouched by any condition that appears in matter. And when you rest in this knowing, when you refuse to claim sickness as your identity while still acknowledging the body's experience, healing happens naturally without the struggle of trying to fix, fight, or force anything to change. The same exact principle applies with equal power to every other area of your life where you're experiencing lack, limitation, or suffering. When you're facing financial pressure, the automatic response is to claim, "I am poor and I need supply." But in that very declaration, you're identifying your true self with poverty, with lack, with insufficiency. The shift happens when you recognize I am is the infinite abundance of God made visible in form. Not someday, not when circumstances change, but right now. When you're experiencing loneliness, when you feel isolated and disconnected, the temptation is to declare, "I am alone and I need love." But that statement claims that your true nature is isolated, cut off, separate. The recognition that transforms everything is, "I am," is the presence of love itself. Not seeking love, not needing love from outside, but being the very essence of love, expressing through this particular form. This shift from operating in lack consciousness to resting in wholeness consciousness transforms your entire experience of life. Not because you're denying problems or pretending challenges don't exist, but because you're recognizing what lies beneath all problems. The eternal I that is never touched, never diminished, never limited by any condition that appears in the world of form. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic because there's a crucial distinction that prevents most people from experiencing the full power of this truth. Type, "I see the difference now" in the comments if you're beginning to understand how this differs from every other approach you've tried. There's a crucial distinction here that prevents people from dismissing this as just another form of spiritual bypassing or toxic positivity. This isn't about denying circumstances or pretending problems don't exist while stuffing down your real feelings and experiences. It's not about putting on a fake smile and declaring everything is fine when it clearly isn't. That kind of denial actually reinforces suffering because you're resisting what is fighting against reality, trying to convince yourself and others that you're experiencing something different than what's actually showing up. What we're talking about here is recognition, seeing what lies beneath all circumstances, recognizing the eternal I that is your true identity, understanding that this essence remains unchanged by any condition that appears in the world of form. You acknowledge the appearance fully. You don't pretend the body isn't showing symptoms, or the bank account isn't low, but you rest in the deeper reality that transcends all temporary conditions. And this is where the radical simplicity of this understanding sets it apart from virtually every other spiritual teaching you've encountered. Most approaches give you something to do, a technique to master, a practice to perform. Visualize what you want for 15 minutes each morning. Affirm positive statements 50 times per day. Follow this manifestation method with precise steps. Practice these specific techniques for attracting abundance. The endless doing keeps you trapped in the mindset that you're incomplete, that you need to add something to yourself to become whole. But what Jesus revealed through his use of I am is something far more powerful than any technique could ever be. It's a state of being, a resting place, a recognition of what already is. I am is not an action you perform with effort and discipline. It's a recognition you rest in, a knowing that dissolves struggle, because there's nothing to achieve, nothing to become, nowhere to arrive. This revelation completely turns our conventional approach to healing upside down and inside out. We've been taught that healing is about changing conditions, finding the right treatment, getting the correct diagnosis, taking the proper medication, or thinking positive thoughts that somehow override negative circumstances. All of these approaches operate from the premise that the condition is real and you need to do something to it, about it or against it to make it change. But what's being revealed here is that healing isn't fundamentally about changing conditions at all. It's about changing identity, about recognizing who you truly are beneath the layers of false identification with temporary states. When you know yourself as the I am, when you recognize that your true identity is the infinite presence expressing in form, conditions have no choice but to align with that truth, because consciousness determines experience, not the other way around. Think about the profound implications of this shift in understanding. You're not fighting against illness, poverty, or loneliness anymore. You're not trying to manipulate circumstances or force reality to conform to your desires. You're simply recognizing what is already true beneath appearances, and that recognition naturally dissolves the false belief structures that were maintaining the problematic conditions in the first place. The transformation happens not through effort, but through awareness, not through doing, but through being. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic by sharing something that demonstrates exactly how this works in real life, because theory without practice remains powerless. Show me how this works in the comments if you're ready to see this principle in action through actual experiences. The transformation that happens when this understanding deepens is truly remarkable, and it shows up in ways that completely defy conventional logic about how change occurs. You stop living from the level of effect, where you're constantly reacting to appearances, scrambling to fix problems, desperately trying to manipulate circumstances into being different than they are. Instead, you begin to rest in the I am, in the recognition of your true identity beneath all conditions. And from that resting place, from that stillness of knowing what you are, every need begins to be met through channels you never anticipated. Every problem starts to dissolve without the struggle you thought would be necessary. Every fear vanishes not because you fought it, but because you recognized it had nothing to do with your true nature. The transformation happens not through effort, but through spiritual recognition of what is already true. Let me share something that illustrates exactly how this works in real life, because without concrete examples, spiritual principles can remain abstract concepts that never touch our actual experience. There was a woman named Margaret who had suffered with chronic pain for 7 years. This wasn't minor discomfort. This was debilitating pain that affected every aspect of her daily life, every decision she made, every moment of her existence. She tried everything available to her, every treatment that doctors recommended, every specialist who might have answers, every alternative approach she could find. Doctors ran countless tests and found nothing physically wrong that could explain the intensity of her suffering. No treatment brought lasting relief. The pain would diminish temporarily and then return, sometimes even stronger than before. When Margaret finally met Edgar Cayce, she was desperate for him to do something, to use his gifts to heal her, to pray over her condition, to access higher knowledge that would tell her what was wrong and how to fix it. But Cayce didn't do any of those things. He didn't pray for her healing. He didn't treat her condition. He didn't give her a special technique or a list of remedies to try. Instead, he asked her one simple, penetrating question that would change everything. Who is the I that says, "I am in pain"? At first, Margaret was confused by the question. She'd come for healing, for answers, for relief from years of suffering, and he was asking her what seemed like a philosophical riddle. What did he mean? Who is the I? She was the one in pain. Her body hurt. The pain was real. But Cayce pressed deeper with his inquiry, asking questions that forced Margaret to examine her most fundamental assumptions about identity. Is the I am you speak of capable of pain? Can infinite spirit hurt? Can God suffer? These weren't rhetorical questions. They were invitations to recognize something beneath the surface of her experience. Margaret sat in silence for nearly 20 minutes, and during that time, something fundamental shifted in her consciousness. It wasn't a sudden flash of insight or a dramatic moment of revelation. It was a gradual dawning, a slow recognition that she'd been making a critical error in identification. She'd been identifying her true self, the I am of her being, with a body and its sensations. She'd been claiming that the infinite consciousness expressing as her life was in pain, that her essential nature was suffering, that who she really was could be limited by physical sensations. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, because what happened next in Margaret's journey reveals the practical power of this recognition. Right identity shifted everything in the comments, if you're beginning to see how this same principle might apply to what you're facing. In that moment of recognition, Margaret realized the pain didn't belong to the I that she truly was. It belonged to a false sense of identity, to the mistaken belief that her essential nature could be limited by physical sensations. And here's what's remarkable about what happened next. Within 3 weeks of that shift in consciousness, her pain began to diminish, not through any new treatment, not through fighting the sensations or trying to make them go away, but simply through the recognition of what she actually was beneath the experience. Within 2 months, the pain that had dominated 7 years of her life was completely gone. Her journey of healing came not from changing the condition directly, but from recognizing her true nature, and the condition had no choice but to align with that recognition. There's another story that reveals this same principle operating in a completely different area of life. Robert was facing the collapse of his business, watching everything he'd built over years crumbling before his eyes. Customers were leaving, revenue was dropping, debts were mounting, and every morning he'd wake up with the same thoughts running through his mind. I am failing. I am losing everything. His prayers during this time were desperate pleas for divine intervention, begging God to save his business, to send customers, to provide a miracle from outside himself that would rescue him from the disaster he was facing. But behind the scenes of his struggle was something he couldn't see, a fundamental misconception about his identity and the true source of his supply. Robert was operating from the belief that his business was his source, that customers were his supply, that money came from external circumstances he needed to control and manipulate. And when those external circumstances started falling apart, he felt powerless, victimized by forces beyond his control, trapped in a situation that seemed to have no solution except divine intervention from outside himself. Every declaration of "I am failing" and "I am broke" was reinforcing the very reality he was desperate to escape, claiming lack and limitation as his fundamental identity. When Robert attended one of Edgar Cayce's talks and heard him speak about the "I am," something profound cracked open in his consciousness. It wasn't a gentle, gradual shift like Margaret experienced. It was more like a lightning bolt of recognition that shattered his entire framework of understanding. He realized in that moment that he'd been claiming lack as his identity for months, constantly declaring, "I am broke," as if poverty was his essential nature. He saw clearly that he'd been identifying the infinite consciousness of his being with temporary financial circumstances, forgetting that the I he truly was is infinite supply itself, the very abundance of God expressing in form. This mindset shift didn't just change his thoughts or give him a more positive attitude about his situation. It transformed his entire reality from the inside out. He stopped seeing himself as a desperate businessman trying to save a failing enterprise and began recognizing himself as infinite intelligence and abundance expressing through business form. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic because what Robert did next reveals the practical application that anyone can use when facing their own challenges. Type, "The source is within," in the comments if you're seeing how this applies to your own relationship with supply and abundance. Robert began implementing a daily practice that completely changed his relationship with his circumstances. Every single morning before he looked at financial numbers, before he checked emails, before he dove into the panic and pressure of trying to save his business, he would sit quietly and recognize the truth of his being. I am is the abundance of God. I am is infinite resource. I am is divine intelligence expressing. Not as affirmations trying to convince himself of something he didn't believe, but as recognition of what was actually true beneath the appearance of lack. The transformation wasn't immediate, and that's important to understand because most people give up when they don't see instant results. It took 4 months of consistent practice, of returning again and again to the recognition of his true identity, even when circumstances seemed to contradict it completely. But slowly, gradually, something began to shift. Ideas started coming to him that he'd never considered before. Connections appeared with people who could help in ways he hadn't anticipated. Opportunities opened up that had been completely invisible to him when he was operating from lack consciousness. His business didn't just survive the crisis, it evolved into something more aligned with his true purpose, something that expressed who he actually was, rather than what he thought he needed to be to make money. The entire trajectory of his life changed, not because he manipulated circumstances, but because he changed the consciousness from which he was operating. The key insight that emerges from both Margaret's story and Robert's journey is profound and often missed. The change wasn't in circumstances first. External conditions didn't shift, and then their consciousness followed. It worked the opposite way. The transformation happened in consciousness first, in how they identified themselves, in what they claimed I am to be. When these individuals stopped identifying with lack, pain, or failure, when they ceased claiming limitation as their essential nature, a new reality had space to flow through them naturally. The outer world simply reflected the inner transformation that had already taken place in their understanding of who they truly were. And this brings us to the critical distinction between understanding something intellectually and actually living from that understanding. You can grasp this truth about I am with your mind. You can find it fascinating and inspiring. You can agree with every word I'm saying and yet see absolutely no change in your life. Understanding this truth intellectually doesn't transform your experience. You must practice it, embody it, live from it, until it becomes your natural state of being rather than an interesting concept you think about occasionally. Edgar Cayce called this practicing the presence. Not thinking about God as a distant concept, not praying to God as an external power, but recognizing moment by moment that the I of your being is God, expressing right here, right now, in this present moment. It's about embodying this consciousness in everyday experiences, not just in meditation sessions or during crises when you remember to apply spiritual principles. Start with the smallest, most ordinary moments of your day. When you wake up in the morning, before your mind fills with problems and tasks and worries about everything you need to do, pause and recognize, I am awake. Not as a limited person waking to face another difficult day of struggle, but as infinite consciousness expressing as this experience of waking. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, because there's a specific technique that can help you maintain this recognition even when circumstances are screaming the opposite message. Leave "I'm practicing this now" in the comments if you're beginning to apply this understanding to your actual daily experience. When you eat, recognize, I am sustained by infinite substance. When you work, recognize I am is the intelligence accomplishing this task. When you encounter challenges, pause and return to the truth beneath appearances. This isn't affirmation trying to make something true that you don't believe yet. This is recognition of what has always been true, what could never not be true, regardless of what temporary conditions are showing up in your experience. If you made it all the way to the end of this conversation with me, I want you to know that wasn't an accident. Something in you recognized the truth of what we've been exploring together. Something deeper than your conscious mind brought you here because you're ready for this shift in consciousness, even if your circumstances haven't caught up yet. And that readiness is everything. If this message resonated with something deep inside you, if you felt that shift beginning to happen as we move through these insights together, I'd love to have you join this community. Hit that subscribe button because I share these kinds of transformative spiritual principles regularly, always focusing on how to actually apply them in your real life rather than just understanding them as abstract concepts. This isn't about collecting information, it's about transformation, and that's what we're committed to here. Leave a comment saying, "This was meant for me," if you feel like this video found you at exactly the right moment in your journey. I read every comment, and there's something powerful about declaring your recognition publicly. It deepens the shift that's already happening in your consciousness. And if you found value in what we explored together today, take a second to hit the like button. It helps this message reach others who are searching for exactly this understanding, people who are tired of struggling and ready to remember who they truly are. There's a video right here that takes this understanding even deeper, exploring how to apply I am consciousness to specific life challenges in ways that create immediate shifts. Click and continue with me over there, because your journey is just beginning, and what comes next might be exactly what you need to hear right now.